The Galactic Concord had ruled the known universe for over 12,000 years, and in all that time they had never been wrong about a species. Their system was perfect, or so they believed. Every civilization that joined their great alliance was measured and rated and placed into a category that would define them forever. The archivists of Velthan were responsible for this sacred duty, and they took their work very seriously. They had developed tests for everything. Physical strength was measured by how much weight a being could lift and how hard they could strike. Natural weaponry counted claws and fangs and poison glands and anything else that could kill. Regenerative capacity showed how fast a species could heal from wounds. Sensory range revealed how far they could see and hear and smell danger. All of these numbers were combined into one final score called the threat classification. This number decided everything. A high-threat species was treated with respect and given important positions in the Concord military. A low-threat species was protected and guided and kept safe from the dangers of the galaxy. Ambassador Kethron of the Vorath had seen many species classified during his long career. The Vorath themselves were an impressive race, standing over 3 meters tall with 4 powerful arms, covered in iridescent scales that shifted color with their moods. They had natural armor built into their skin and claws that could tear through metal. Their threat classification was an impressive 8.9. Kethron was proud of this number, as all Vorath were. So when the news came that a new species had been discovered in a distant arm of the galaxy, he was curious to see what they might be. The first images from the scout ships made him feel something unexpected: pity. The creatures called themselves humans, and they came from a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. They were soft and fragile-looking things with no claws and no fangs and no natural armor of any kind. Their skin could be cut by a simple blade, and their bones could be broken by forces that would barely scratch a nut in the Vorath. The preliminary reports were almost sad to read. The humans needed to sleep for nearly a third of their entire existence, which seemed like a tremendous waste of time. They could be killed by small changes in temperature or atmospheric pressure. Their own star produced radiation that would slowly poison them if they stayed under it too long. Even the water they needed to survive could kill them if they breathed it. And Kethron shook his massive head as he reviewed the data and wondered how such a species had ever survived long enough to reach the stars. The formal assessment came back from the archivists. Within a standard cycle, species human from Sol 3 had been fully evaluated. Physical strength scored 4.2, which was well below the galactic average. Natural weaponry received a mere 0.8. Since humans had only their blunt teeth and soft fists, regenerative capacity was rated at 2.1. Because humans healed slowly and scarred easily, sensory range came in at 3.4, since human eyes and ears were limited compared to most species. The final threat classification was calculated and displayed for the council to see. Minimal Kethron felt a strange sadness as he authorized the designation. These humans would never be warriors or anything of great importance in the Concord. They would need protection and guidance like children who could never grow up. He assigned them to the Protected Species Registry, which meant they would receive special care and supervision. It was the kind thing to do. The human delegation arrived at Concord Station 3 cycles later, and Kethron made time to greet them personally. He wanted to see these fragile beings with his own eyes. The group that walked off the transport ship was small and unimpressive. Their leader was a female called Sarah Chun, who stood barely half his height. She looked up at him without any fear in her eyes, which surprised him a little. Most weak species showed submission when meeting a Vorath for the first time. Chun simply smiled and extended her small hand in what he had learned was a human greeting gesture. Kethron carefully took her hand in one of his and tried not to squeeze too hard. He could feel the delicate bones beneath her skin and marveled that she could function with such a fragile frame. Ambassador Kethron, she said, in a voice that was calm and confident. "Thank you for welcoming us to the Concord. It is my honor, Captain Chen," he replied. "We are pleased to guide your people into the galactic community." He chose his words carefully to be kind. The humans spent the next several cycles touring the station and meeting with various council members. Kethron noticed something interesting about them as the days passed. They asked many questions. This was not unusual since most new species were curious about the Concord, but the human questions were different somehow. They wanted to know about military deployments and defensive capabilities. They asked about past conflicts and how they had been resolved. They were very interested in the species that had been defeated or destroyed over the centuries. Chun took notes on everything, and her team recorded every conversation. They smiled politely and nodded at all the right times and thanked everyone for their help. Kethron assumed they were simply trying to understand their new protectors. He did not consider that the questions might have a pattern. He did not realize that humans had evolved on a world that the Concord would have classified as a Category 7 death planet. He did not know that Earth was home to predators and parasites and diseases and natural disasters that would terrify most species in the known galaxy. He did not understand that a species does not survive such a world by being weak. The metrics had measured human bodies and found them lacking, but the metrics had no way to measure human minds. They could not calculate determination or creativity, or the stubborn refusal to accept defeat. They could not quantify the fire that burned in human hearts when something they loved was threatened on her last day at the station. Chun stood before the council and formally accepted humanity's place in the Protected Species Registry. She smiled her polite smile and thanked them for their kindness and promised that humans would be good members of the galactic community. Kethron watched her and felt satisfied that he had done a good thing for these fragile creatures. He had no idea that he was looking at the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever known. And by the time anyone realized the truth, it would already be too late. The warning came without any preparation, and the Concord was not ready for what followed. Deep space sensors detected movement in Sector 14, where no movement should have been possible. That region had been declared dead space centuries ago. After the stars there began to collapse and die. Nothing could survive in such a place, or so everyone had believed. The first images showed a darkness that moved like a living thing, billions of shapes swarming through the void between dying stars. Ships that were not quite ships, but something organic and horrible. The Vrexal had come. Kethron stood in the command center and watched the feeds with growing horror as report after report came flooding in. The Vrexal were a hive species, driven by pure predatory instinct and an endless hunger. Each drone was connected to a central mind that thought only of consuming and spreading. They did not negotiate or trade or make treaties. They simply devoured everything in their path and used the resources to make more of themselves. The first colony to fall was Thelian Prime, and it happened so fast that no one could respond. The Thelians were a proud crystalline species with a threat classification of 7.8. They were known throughout the galaxy as fierce warriors with bodies made of living gemstone. Their planet had defenses that should have held for months. It fell in 6 hours. The feeds showed the swarm descending like a black tide that blocked out the stars. Thelian warriors stood their ground and fought with everything they had. They shattered hundreds of drones with each swing of their crystal blades, but for every drone that fell, a dozen more took its place. The swarm did not care about losses, because losses meant nothing to a hive-minded individual. Drones were just cells in a larger body, and cells could always be replaced. The Thelians broke their morale collapsed when they realized that victory was impossible. Those who could flee did so, and those who could not were consumed. Kethron watched the last moments of a civilization that had existed for 8,000 years. He felt his scales go pale with a fear he had never known before. The admiral of the Concord fleet was an old Varath named Dexon, who had fought in a dozen wars. Even he looked shaken as he addressed the emergency council. "We cannot hold the outer sectors," he announced in a voice that trembled slightly. "The swarm is too large and too fast, and we have nothing that can stop them." "What do you propose?" Kethron asked. "We regroup the fleet at Marker 7 and establish a defensive line there," Vexan replied. "We evacuate the outer colonies and save who we can, and those we cannot save." The Admiral did not answer that question. A voice spoke from the back of the chamber, and everyone turned to look Captain Sarah. Chun stood there with a small group of humans who had been observing the council session. She looked the same as always, with her calm eyes and her polite expression, but something was different now. Something in the way she held herself. "We have 3 colony ships in that sector," Chun said. 12,000 humans, including 4,000 children. Dexon looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. "Your people will be evacuated in order of priority, Captain," he said. "But I must be honest with you." He paused and chose his next words carefully. "Your species is not combat rated." He continued, "You will be placed on the protected evacuation list, which means other species will be given priority for transport." Kethron expected Chun to argue or plead or show some sign of distress. She did none of these things. Instead, she turned to the other humans in the room, and they exchanged looks that seemed to carry entire conversations. Some kind of silent communication passed between them. A decision was made. Chun turned back to the Admiral and spoke in a voice that was perfectly calm. "We understand." "Admiral," she said, "we are requesting permission to deploy our own response to the situation." Kethron almost laughed but stopped himself. "Captain," he said gently, "no offense intended, but your species is not equipped for this kind of conflict." "No," Chun agreed, "we are not. The Vrexal have destroyed civilizations far more powerful than yours. Kethron, continued species with natural weapons and armor and centuries of military tradition." "Yes," Chun said, "we have read the reports." "Then you understand that any resistance would be futile." Chun tilted her head slightly and looked at him with those calm, dark eyes. "We understand that you believe it would be futile," she said, "but we are not asking for your help, Ambassador." She straightened her shoulders, and something changed in her expression. The polite smile was gone now. What remained was something harder and colder and far more dangerous. "We are not asking for permission either," she continued. "We are informing you as a courtesy that humanity will be handling the defense of our own people." "Captain, that is madness," Dexon protested. "You will all die for nothing." Chun turned to leave, and her people fell in behind her. She paused at the door and looked back one last time. "Admiral," she said, "humans do not abandon their children." Then she was gone, and the council sat in stunned silence. Kethron felt a strange chill run down his spine. For the first time since meeting the humans, he wondered if perhaps there was something the classification had missed. But he pushed the thought aside because the numbers did not lie. The humans would fly to their colony, and they would die there. It was simple mathematics. There was no other possible outcome. He had no way of knowing that mathematics was about to meet something it could not calculate. He had no idea that the humans were about to teach the galaxy a lesson that would never be forgotten. The lesson was simple, but the Vrexal would learn it in blood. Humans did not know how to give up. The colony of New Helsinki had only existed for 18 months when the swarm arrived. It was a small settlement built on a rocky world with thin air and cold temperatures. The humans had chosen it because it reminded them of places on Earth where their ancestors had learned to survive harsh winters. They had built homes and schools and farms that grew food in heated greenhouses. 4,000 children lived there, along with 8,000 adults who had crossed the stars to build a new life. None of them had expected to become soldiers. The first warning came 3 days before the swarm reached the planet. Captain Chun arrived with every human ship that could be gathered on short notice. She brought with her 400 military. personnel and 200 civilian volunteers who had refused to stay behind. The colony leaders asked what could be done with so few defenders. Chun looked at them and told them the truth. "We cannot win this fight," she said. "The swarm is too large. And we are too few." "Then why are you here?" they asked. "Because winning is not the only thing that matters," Chun replied. "Your children need time to reach the deep shelters." "How much time?" "As much as we can give you." The humans worked for 3 days without sleep. They dug trenches and built walls and turned every building into a fortress. They created kill zones and overlapping fields of fire. They set traps using mining explosives and construction. Equipment Chun walked among them and watched her people transform a peaceful colony into a death trap. She knew most of them would not survive what was coming. They knew it too, and still they worked. Sergeant Maya Torres was a small woman with dark hair and steady hands. She had grown up on a farm in a place called Argentina and had joined the military because she wanted to see the stars. She never imagined she would die defending a colony on a frozen rock at the edge of known space. But here she was. Sergeant, one of her soldiers, said, "The civilians have reached the shelter entrance." "Good," Torres replied. "How long until the swarm arrives?" 6 hours. Torres nodded and checked her rifle for the 100th time. "Then we have 6 hours to turn this place into a nightmare." The swarm descended on New Helsinki like a black rain falling from the sky. Millions of drones dropped from orbit and spread across the surface in waves of chitin and hunger. They expected easy prey. The Thelians had been strong, and they had broken. The Varth were powerful, and they had retreated. These humans were rated as minimal threats, with soft bodies and no natural weapons. The swarm expected them to run or hide or simply die. They did none of these things. The first wave of drones hit the outer defenses and disappeared in a series of massive explosions. The humans had buried mining charges under the landing zones. Thousands of drones were torn apart in seconds. The hive mind felt this loss like a small sting and sent more drones to replace the fallen. The second wave reached the walls and began to climb. Human rifles opened fire from every window and rooftop. The weapons were primitive compared to Concord technology, but they worked well enough. Drones fell by the hundreds. And still they kept coming. The walls were breached within the first hour. Torres and her squad fell back to the secondary positions and kept fighting. She had started with 12 soldiers. By hour 3, she had 8. By hour 7, she had 4. Her ammunition was running low, and her body was screaming for rest. She had been fighting for 19 hours straight, with only stimulants keeping her on her feet. But something else was keeping her going too. Something older than medicine, something that did not have a name in any database. A drone lunged at her from the rubble, and she pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. Her rifle was empty. Torres did not hesitate. She swung the rifle like a club and smashed it into the drone's head. The stock shattered, and the drone staggered. She hit it again and again until it stopped moving. Then she picked up one of its severed forelimbs, which ended in a natural blade. She used that blade to kill 2 more drones before finding another rifle. Her radio crackled with the voice of her commanding officer. "Torres, fall back to point 7, he ordered. "That is a direct order." Torres keyed her mic with fingers that were slick with blood. "Negative, sir," she replied. "They are between us and the civilian shelter entrance." "You cannot hold that position, Sergeant." "No, sir, I cannot." She paused and looked at her 3 remaining soldiers. They looked back at her with eyes that held no fear, only determination. "But if we fall back, they will find the children," Torres continued. "So we are not falling back. Sergeant, you will die." "Yes, sir," Torres agreed. "But we will make them pay for every meter." She cut the communication and turned to her squad. "You heard the man," she said. "Anyone want to leave?" No one moved. Torres smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Good," she said. "Let us show these things what humans are made of." Across the colony, the same scene was repeated again and again. Humans fought until their weapons ran dry, and then fought with whatever they could find. They did not break, and they did not run. The hive mind had never seen anything like it. Every other species had a breaking point, a moment when survival instinct overcame everything else. The humans seemed to have no such limit. They fought and died, and the ones who remained kept fighting. The hive mind processed this information, and for the first time in its existence, felt something strange, something it had never experienced before: uncertainty. Admiral Kethron arrived at New Helsinki 3 days later than anyone had expected. The fleet had been delayed by emergency evacuations and strategic retreats. Every tactical model the Concorde possessed had predicted that the human colony would fall within 4 hours. The relief ships were sent to recover remains and data. No one expected to find survivors. The first images from the descending shuttles made no sense at all. Kethron stood in the command center of his flagship and stared at the screens with all 4 of his arms hanging limp at his sides. His scales had gone pale, and his eyes were wide. "This is not possible," he whispered. The colony of New Helsinki was a ruin. Buildings had been reduced to rubble, and the streets were torn apart by weapons fire and explosions. Bodies of Rexel drones were everywhere. Not hundreds, not thousands, millions. They were piled in the streets like walls of chitin and dead flesh. They had been stacked in windows to block entry points. They had been used as barricades and shields and stepping stones. The humans had killed so many drones that they had run out of places to put the corpses, and in the center of this nightmare, the humans were still fighting. Kethron watched the feeds as a small group of defenders held a position at what had once been a school. There were maybe 20 of them left. They were wounded and exhausted and covered in blood that was both red and black. They should have been dead days ago, but they were still shooting, still holding the line. "Get me down there," Kethron ordered. Now. His shuttle landed in a cleared area near the main defensive line. Concorde soldiers poured out to reinforce the human positions and push back the remaining swarm. Kethron stepped onto the surface of New Helsinki and felt his boots sink into ground that had turned to mud from all the blood. The smell was overwhelming: death and smoke and something else, something that smelled like iron and fire. Captain Chun met him at the landing zone. She was limping badly, and her left arm was bound tight against her chest. Her face was covered in dirt and dry blood, and her eyes had the hollow look of someone who had not slept in days. But she was alive. She was still standing. "Ambassador," she said in a voice that was rough and cracked. "Thank you for coming." Kethron did not know what to say. He had prepared words of sympathy and condolence. He had expected to find corpses and record final messages. He had not expected this. "The colonists," he finally managed. "Your people." Chun allowed herself a small smile. 93% evacuation to the deep shelters before the swarm breached our perimeter. She reported the children are safe. "How?" Kethron asked. "How is that possible?" "We held the access points," Chun said simply. "They could not get past us to reach the shelters." "For 3 days." "Yes." Kethron felt his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. "Your losses?" he asked. Quietly, Chun's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. Pain perhaps, or pride, or both. 412 military personnel deployed, she said. 81 survivors? She paused and took a breath that seemed to cost her something. 217 civilian volunteers. She continued. 43 survivors. Kethron did the math in his head. Over 600 humans had died on this frozen rock. They had died to save 12,000 colonists. They had died knowing that they would die. Why? He asked. He needed to understand. The numbers made no sense to him. No species sacrificed 80% of a military force for any objective. It was wasteful and inefficient and completely irrational. Chun looked at him with those dark eyes that seemed to hold depths he could not fathom. Because they were our people, she said. because someone had to stand between the swarm and the children. But you knew you would lose, Kethron pressed. You told me yourself that victory was impossible. Yes, Chun agreed. We knew we would lose. Then why fight at all? Chun was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was soft but carried a weight that Kethron felt in his bones. Ambassador, she said, I am going to tell you something about humans. She gestured at the battlefield around them, at the piles of dead drones and the ruined buildings and the blood-soaked ground. We do not fight because we think we can win, she said. We fight because some things are worth dying for. She pointed toward the shelter entrance, where medics were finally bringing up the colonists who had survived in the darkness below. Children emerged blinking in the light. They ran to their parents who had fought and bled to keep them safe. Those children, Chun continued, they are worth dying for. She looked back at Kethron, and her expression was calm and certain. Every single human who came here knew they would probably die, she said. They came anyway, because of the children, because that is what humans do. Chun replied, when something threatens what we love, we do not calculate acceptable losses. She paused and looked out at the swarm that was beginning to regroup in the distance. They were moving slower now, more carefully. We just fight, she finished, until we win or until we are all dead. Kethron watched a soldier being carried past on a stretcher. The man was missing most of his right side, and his wound should have killed him hours ago. But he was still conscious, still giving orders to the medics, still trying to sit up so he could see the battlefield. Put me down, the soldier was saying. I can still fight. Kethron turned away. He did not trust himself to speak. He'd lived for over 200 years and had seen many things. He had never seen anything like this. The Vrexal hive mind had consumed 17 civilizations before reaching Concord space. It had never retreated from a conquest. It had never shown hesitation or fear. But as Kethron watched the swarm in the distance, he saw something new in their movements, something that looked almost like caution. In 3 days, the humans had taught the hive mind something it had never learned. Before, they had taught it what happened when prey refused to act like prey. The war against the Vrexal lasted for 2 more years after the Battle of New Helsinki. It was the bloodiest conflict in Concord history. Worlds burned and billions died, and the swarm kept coming. But something had changed. The hive mind had learned to fear. Not the Concord fleet with its advanced weapons and powerful ships. Not the Vorath with their natural armor and crushing strength. Not any of the dozens of species rated as high threats. The hive mind had learned to fear the human's word. Spread through the galaxy about what had happened on that frozen colony world. Stories were told of soldiers who fought until their weapons broke and then fought with their hands. Stories of civilians who picked up rifles and stood beside trained warriors. Stories of a species that simply refused to stop. The humans became something they had never been before. They became legends. Kethron watched the change happen with a mixture of awe and unease. Human volunteers appeared on every front line. They did not come in great numbers because there were not many of them. But wherever they went, the tide of battle shifted. Not because humans were strong. They were still the same fragile creatures with soft skin and breakable bones. But because humans did something that no other species could do. They inspired. Other races watched the humans fight and felt something stir inside them. If these weak beings could stand against the swarm, then perhaps anyone could morale across the Concord. Improved soldiers who had been ready to retreat found new courage. The war began to turn. The final battle took place in the Vrexal home sector. The Concord fleet pushed into the dead space where the swarm had been born. They found a dying region of collapsed stars and broken worlds. And at the center, they found the hive mind itself, a massive organic structure the size of a small moon. The heart of the swarm, Captain Chun, led the assault team that boarded the structure. She had been promoted 3 times during the war but still insisted on being at the front. Her team cut through the outer defenses and fought their way to the central chamber. Kethron went with them because he needed to see this for himself. The hive mind spoke to them through 1,000 voices. It had never communicated before. It had never needed to. But now it wanted to understand why. The voices asked, "Why you not stop?" Chun stood before the pulsing mass that was the heart of the swarm. Her rifle was raised and her finger was on the trigger. "Because we cannot," she replied. "We have killed so many of you," the voices said. "We have taken your worlds and your ships and your people." "Yes," Chun agreed. "Yet you keep fighting." "Yes, this is not logical." The voices said, "Survival is the highest priority for all species." Chun lowered her rifle and looked at the hive mind with something like pity. "That is where you made your mistake," she said. "You assumed we were like everyone else. You are weak." The voices protested, "Our drones are stronger and faster, and we outnumber you 1,000,000 to 1. "True. Then how?" the voices demanded. "How have you defeated us?" Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was calm and certain. "Because there is something stronger than strength," she said. "There is will." She raised her rifle again. "You can break our bodies," she continued. "You can burn our worlds and kill our children." Her finger tightened on the trigger. "But you cannot break what we are," she said. "And what we are is stubborn and angry and too stupid to quit." She fired. The war ended that day, not with the swarm's destruction, but with its retreat. For the first time in its long existence, the hive mind fled from an enemy. It took what remained of its drones and disappeared into the void between galaxies. The Concorde was saved. The archivists of Velfan demanded a new assessment of the human species. They had studied the war carefully, and what they found changed. Everything. Humans were still physically weak. The numbers had not lied about that. But the numbers had missed something important. They had missed endurance. Humans came from a world where predators hunted by chasing their prey until it collapsed. From exhaustion, humans could run for days. They could march for weeks. They could function through injuries that would disable any other species. They had missed adaptability. Humans did not specialize in any one environment. They survived in deserts and jungles and frozen wastelands and underwater, and even in space. They changed themselves to fit their surroundings. Instead of waiting for their surroundings to change, they had missed creativity. Humans solved problems in ways that no other species could predict. They invented tools and tactics and strategies that had never been tried before. They turned weakness into strength through sheer, stubborn innovation. But most importantly, they had missed something that the archivists called cooperative. Sacrifice. Potential humans would die for each other, not just for their genetic relatives or their clan groups, for any human, sometimes not even for humans. They would stand between danger and the helpless, and simply refuse to move. Ambassador Kethron attended the ceremony where the human threat classification was formally revised. He watched Captain Chen accept the Concorde's highest military honor. Behind her stood the survivors of the war, scarred and battered and missing limbs, but still standing. Always still standing. The new classification was displayed for all to see. Species human from Sol 3 threat classification. Do not engage. The notation beneath was unprecedented. It read, "Subject species demonstrates psychological and social characteristics outside standard parameters, and physical weakness is offset by extreme persistence and tactical creativity and willingness to sustain unlimited casualties in defense of designated objectives. Species does not recognize acceptable losses. Species does not retreat from designated protected assets. Species has demonstrated capacity to function beyond all projected physical and psychological limits. Recommendation: full diplomatic integration with military alliance. Strongly advised, under no circumstances attempt hostile action against human population centers or designated allies. Additional note: When humans use the phrase "over my dead body," they are not speaking metaphorically. Chun caught Catherine's eye across the chamber. She smiled at him, and it was a warm, tired smile with no triumph in it. That was perhaps the most frightening thing of all. The humans had not fought for glory or conquest. They had not wanted to prove anything. They had just done what humans did. Catherine thought about the first day he had met the human delegation. He remembered feeling pity for these soft, fragile creatures. He remembered thinking that they would need protection and guidance like children. He had been so wrong. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again, and as Catherine watched Chun shake hands with the Concord leaders, he felt something he had never expected to feel: gratitude, because if the Rexall ever returned, the humans would be there, standing between the swarm and everyone it wanted to consume, fighting until the very end. That was what humans did, and the galaxy was better for it.